Welcome everyone to this Learning from Excellence call. We're going to be focusing on appreciation today, appreciative inquiry, and the advantages and how this and feedback interact. This is a call hosted by the Learning from Excellence Special Interest Group, and we have the pleasure to have the convener here, Gemma, who will complete this introduction. Gemma, word with you.
Thank you, Dorian, and welcome all of you. It's lovely to see so many of you here today. As Dorian mentioned, this is one of the second webinars that have been hosted by Q. And what we're going to look at today is how we can use appreciative inquiry to turn excellent feedback into improvement. For those of you that don't know me, as I say, I'm the convener of the LFE SIG group, and I'm an anaesthetist in Plymouth, Devon. So today we are really fortunate to have the inspiring and joyous Suzanne Quinney. So she has been involved in appreciative inquiry since 2006, and then in 2010 she started her own company, Appreciating People, which has worked across almost every sector to enhance people's appreciative inquiry skills. But she clearly holds a very special place in her heart for the work that she has done with the NHS. And not only that, Suzanne has been a great supporter of the LFE community right from the very beginning. And she has taught not only me, but a number of people, supported me and a number of people, and inspired many of us through our LFE and appreciative inquiry journey. So firstly, thank you, Suzanne, for everything that you have done for all of us. And we're really looking forward to an engaging and inspiring and joyful afternoon. So thank you for taking the time to spend with us today.
Thank you, Gemma. That was a lovely introduction. And Yoriam and Matthew, thank you for hosting us. Welcome, everyone. It's lovely to see a few familiar faces and names. I quickly spotted Aisha and Julia Romano, somebody from Gosh. I've done some training in Gosh, met quite a few years ago now, and the ambulance service. So it's really lovely to see so many of you on the call. And thank you for those beautiful answers that have gone in the chat about what you value about the power of appreciation. It'll be lovely if we can capture those at the end, you know, in a little group, because they're really beautiful. And I think they'll set some keynotes. You might already know this, but one of the things about appreciative inquiry is the power of intention. You know, what do we intend by coming together, by focusing on this topic? And by our focus on it, we also contribute to it coming into being. So we're Gemma and I are going to do this between us. I'm going to give a little introduction to appreciative inquiry, because we're aware, thank you for the survey answers people completed when you booked on. It does give us a good flavour of what experience people might have. So I know there's some people on the call very experienced and practiced, and then others haven't really come across it much. So I hope you'll bear with me if I give a little bit of an introduction. And then we're going to look at some Learning from Excellence reports from Plymouth, and we're going to hear from Gemma about her LFE experience and what that hospital has done over the years. And then we'll look at how to make it practical as well. So I hope we can fit all this into 90 minutes. I'm going to share my screen first. So I hope that's okay. Is that good for Matthew? Just give me the thumbs up. Is it good on the screen? Yeah, great. Okay. So I just chose these 4 words: appreciation, civility, compassion, and excellence, because they're keywords for Plymouth, for Plymouth Hospital, and Gemma might well speak to them later. But I've also put in a few Twitter handles for those of you who want to follow up, because a lot of information gets shared on Twitter in relation to the LFE community and AI. And I've put our website, and thank you to the Health Foundation and Q for hosting us. Right, let me just see, there we go. Right, so appreciative inquiry, it's got These two components make it very simple and very accessible. The idea that when we appreciate something, it increases in value. We talk about things appreciating in value. So we are deliberately wanting to increase the value of something to us and to others when we appreciate it. And then the inquiry is the process of seeking to understand through questions and paying attention. It's hard to, I think, it's hard to overestimate the value of paying attention in this benevolent way. And then because of these two words being in the mix, I also see it as combining heart and mind at work. And so it allows us to be wholehearted in a way that other systems might not do. So I think it's really nice to welcome that aspect in deliberately when you're engaged in appreciative inquiry. And just to take those two ideas a bit further. So by appreciating something, we're nourishing it, we're helping it flourish. And by inquiring into something, we're amplifying it, we're magnifying it, we're looking at it in more detail. And we're not used to doing that. We're used to looking in detail at problems. So this is a big shift in our paradigm, both our internal paradigm and often our external one. So it's some keynotes for it. It's a cooperative search for the best in people, their organizations and the world around them. It's systematic. There's just a few tools and we're going to touch on those today. It's the appreciative conversation, which is a strength-based version of a SWOT. But we're looking to discover what gives our systems life, what helps them be effective. And so at its heart is the art and practice of asking questions. So that's the big skill of appreciative inquiry is about that. I just found this, I was just scrolling through the things that people had put in the survey that they were interested, and somebody put this in their survey answer, how to recognize the humility of the approach. And I just love the way that was phrased, and it's such a key part of doing this work, that we genuinely need to not know the answer. So that humility being effective and inspirational. I just want to take a minute contrasting this paradigm, which can also be called strength-based thinking or asset-based thinking, and the paradigm that we tend to be more embedded in, which is deficit-based thinking. Focus on what's broken, how can we fix it? All of that brings in experts. And my work experience in my very beginning of my working life was in overseas aid with organizations like Oxfam. And I really saw then that focus in those days. I think it's much improved now, but it was on the deficit based, what you know, how can it get fixed? And you usually need an expert to fix it. An expert usually comes from outside. Whereas in the strength-based thinking, we're looking at what strengths can we find that are already within our system? How can we access them and leverage them? How can we use them more? So we talk a lot about strengths in this process. We invite people to do strength surveys, to talk about them, and also then to see how can we align the strengths that are in our team or our system, and how can we make sure that where there's gaps, they get covered by the complementarity of people's strengths. Working on fixing weaknesses has now been well proven to be not a very effective way of doing things, but focusing on strengths is. So I'm also going to touch a bit about the benefits of being positive. And one of the very strong strands of education and information within the appreciative inquiry process is positive psychology. And positive psychology developed in the 90s. 4 professors of psychology got together and started thinking about the fact that over 96% of what they wrote, they taught, they researched was all on illness. And people weren't getting better in the way that they had hoped when they began their careers in psychology. And out of that, they birthed the positive psychology movement. So there, we're looking more at what are the benefits of being positive? And some of them here, it changes how your mind works. It can expand your range of vision. It increases creativity, motivation, and energy. And then we've put this lovely quote in from Henry Ford: whether you think you can or can't, you're right. So the power of our thinking in here really gets highlighted. And so one of the things that the positive psychology process demonstrated is the fact that we all have this negative bias. Our communities tend to have it, our education system, our media, our news feed, everything shows this bias. So once we know that's in the system, we can start considering it. It's just a bias. It's not a fact. It's not necessarily even a reality. And we can pay a bit less attention to it when we know that it's that bias that's creeping in. And that bias, for example, means that we remember negative data for longer and we remember it more accurately. And actually, there is a desirable positivity ratio. This is not about eliminating the negative. What we want to do is just make sure that that ratio is moving in the right direction. So let's think about maybe 5 to 1 as a desirable ratio, 5 positive comments to 1 negative. And with that in mind, just have a look at what your inner dialogue is, what you're saying at home to your family, what you're saying at work or to patients, and see if you can move that ratio up a little bit. So that there's now also a lot of data. I have a lot of statistics, but we won't go into them on this call. But the way in which being positive and appreciative supports individual and team performance and morale. It supports creativity, it supports resilience. So there's loads of benefits for doing that. It is a lovely phrase, start with what's strong, not what's wrong. And there's another, also a really very nice phrase, which comes from Rick Hanson, a positive psychology teacher. And he describes that the brain is like Teflon for the positive and Velcro for the negative. So that really illuminates the negative bias for us, I think, with that lovely statement from him. And this, I use this slide a lot. It's still one of my favorites. But this is what the brain tends to be doing. Can you recognize it? This came from the positive psychology world, but we can start looking at what are our positive emotions and feelings. There's an immense range of words that describe them. And this is probably just a small selection. So let's sort of expand our awareness of all of these positive emotions and attributes. And so we do encourage people to cultivate gratitude. Oh, that slide went a bit funny, sorry. I might have to get rid of that. But one of the things we talk about is doing journaling to increase your awareness of what's happening inside and to increase your awareness of appreciation and its power. And this quote from G.K. Chesterton: gratitude produced the most purely joyful moments that have been best known to man. So appreciate the ordinary, send gratitude notes, do a learning from excellence report if you've got that system in your organization. And then I just put this in. Adrian Plunkett from Learning from Excellence did a lovely short blog recently on the beholder's share. So it's the part of the appreciative experience that's unique to the beholder. And that's long been recognized in the world of art, that the watcher actually contributes to the whole experience of seeing a piece of art. But we want to bring that more into work as well. So consider yourself as a beholder and as a watcher, and consider your moment-to-moment interactions. Perhaps pieces of art is a bit far-fetched, but give them that value and see what your beholder experience is. So there's a link to Adrian's blog on that there. And the other thing that I discovered recently is that tenderness and attention share a root in the Latin verb tendere, which means to stretch or extend, as we do in reaching towards another, acknowledging possible reciprocity. So I saw this and I thought, that's part of what happens in appreciative inquiry. we are paying attention to people in this appreciative way. And so it does bring in a kind of tenderness into our work interactions. So again, look out for that. Watch how when you see it happening externally, or when you see yourself being part of it. In these days, you know, when there's so many pressures on us in the world and in our systems, it's lovely to know we can be part of doing this more. So this is a slide about conversational intelligence meeting heart intelligence. So conversations are not what they seem. They are part of an incredible energetic interaction that impacts our neurochemistry. They activate powerful systems and networks in our brain and heart that read the energy and enable us to engage with others as a friend, not foe. And all that happens in 0.07 of a second. So, don't waste a moment, basically. So this is a little bit more about the heart intelligence. So what's happening when we're bringing our mind and emotions, from Lionel Hampton, gratitude is when memory is stored in the heart and not the mind. So we're looking at the positive core of an organization or a team or a person. These points on the star are all things that we are asking questions about in appreciative conversations. And one of the resources I'll share with you at the end is a kind of a fairly standard open themed appreciative conversation that you could take away and use to have conversations at work or at home. So I'll put that in the resources, Matthew. So there's what we're doing. This is a lovely slide from Dan Hodgkiss, who some of you might know. But it's the lens that we're putting on the world. What lens are you using? This is a slide from a book called Conversations Worth Having, which I really recommend as a great way to get into appreciative inquiry and some of its theory, but always with that emphasis on, is our conversation worth having? And so they've got these 4 categories that are potential conversations. So if it's depreciative, it could be destructive or critical. And if it's appreciative, statement-based is an affirmative conversation, and an inquiry based. So you can say to someone, you know, I really like the way you managed that meeting today. Or if you want to take it just a little bit further, then you say, it was so great how you managed that meeting. What strengths were you drawing on when you dealt with that difficult moment? So it's like, how can you, in a very sort of quiet way, weave in an appreciative inquiry moment into any conversation? And my suggestion to you is that you make it as subtle as you can. You practice the micro. Positive psychology talks a lot about micro moments of positivity. And so this is, see what you can do that can give a very slight shift to a conversation that's happening. And all that time when you're doing that, you're improving your skills and your fluency. So this is another lovely slide from Stavros and Torres, that book. And I love the way Yorian mentioned at the beginning that our very first question on this call was a generative question, one that causes people to reflect, to think, to perhaps think a bit differently than they have done, or to offer something into the mix that it encourages other people to think differently. And within all that, what we're doing is positive framing, which we'll talk a bit more about. We're going to look, one of the key skills of appreciative inquiry is reframing. So we're often presented with a problem or a challenge. So our first job becomes, how can we reframe that into a positive topic? So the first thing that we tend to do is flip it into its opposite. And then we might also decide to put a more poetic frame around it. So here's a few examples just to get us thinking about those. So instead of focusing on improving poor results, we could simply say, let's look at good results, outstanding delivery or delivering an excellent service. Or instead of looking at low staff morale, let's talk about what leads to hope, joy and inspiration. Or let's talk about a satisfied employee team. It becomes your job as the appreciative inquiry practitioner to find the right framing of your topic for your audience. There's always some tweaking to do. this is from a publication that Helen Bevan did a long time ago called Appreciating Our Assets. But here's a few more examples of reframing. So ineffective leadership, the straightforward swap is effective leadership, but then you could decide to go for inspiring leadership or dedicated leadership. Yeah, that becomes up to you and what you think will most benefit your team. Poor team working goes to great team working, or exceptional, or pulling together. Lack of trust, so that could become when we trust each other, or great partnerships, because those need trust. Here's a couple of other nice reframes. Never events. We can reframe to always events. What do we see always? What do we want to see more of? Root cause analysis becomes right cause analysis. A lovely addition to the Appreciative Inquiry world that came from Warsaw. Team, a couple of you on the call, you'll know who you are. And then civility saves lives is another strand really of the learning from excellence movement. But also why I put it in at this point is because this was about the effects of incivility that Chris Turner had witnessed. And he could have called his movement Rudeness Kills, but he chose to frame it in a really positive way, which encouraged all sorts of things. So civility saves lives. So there's a link on this slide to their website and their blog, and there's lots of infographics on there as well. You can look at reframing your emotions, or helping to reframe the emotions of a team or an environment. So whether it's from fear to courage, furious to curious, there are many things that, like daily emotions, you can look inside yourself and see, this is how I'm feeling now. Is there any way I can both accept that feeling that I have and shift it along the spectrum to be more inspired or more positive? And I found this one quite recently. You know, we talk a lot in our sort of psyche somewhere, thanks to some of our religious upbringings, we've got this idea of original sin. So I saw this and I thought, what a great reframe. There's original goodness in all of us. And safety 1 and safety 2, again, there's loads more that we can say about these, and I'm hoping that you'll be able to follow some links and some information that we'll send out on this. But there's an increasing conversation around the two views of safety, safety 1 and safety 2, and they're not so much alternatives as complementary, but we're looking at how as few things as possible can go wrong in safety 1, and we want right. So we're actually reframing some of the concepts of safety 1 into safety 2. And our safety 2 recognizes that actually often our world at work is like the right-hand side of this picture, rather than the way that it can often be said to be like, you know, a hierarchy, a flow, straight lines. In fact, it's often very circular and perhaps a bit chaotic. And I've discovered that Appreciative Inquiry fits really well into that more chaotic and circular environment. It's an iterative approach in itself. And it's a very responsive approach, because you can ask appreciative questions about anything that's gone on once you've got your skill of reframing and setting out your topic. And so I think a lot of you might have already seen this graph on the right, where in safety 1, we're looking at how we can reduce the red on that graph, whereas in safety 2 and in the Appreciative Inquiry world, we're looking at everything to the right of that red. What's going well, including the positive surprises. And in that section, you also find the many great things that happen in the world of positive deviance. So there's another link that we could talk about another time. So Gemma, I think this is where I'm going to hand over to you to talk a little bit about your learning from excellence in Plymouth, and then we'll go back into my slides later. So I will stop sharing. So Gemma, knowing how much you've done in Plymouth, it'd be lovely to hear a bit more about all that.
Well, okay, well, thank you Suzanne, for that. It was absolutely brilliant. As I say, there's so many nuggets in there. I'm going to definitely have to watch the video back to capture everything. So yes, I'm more than happy to share our experience in Plymouth. I don't claim to be an expert. I don't necessarily think we've done it right. I'm sure that many of you have done brilliant things, and it'd be great if we can all share those ideas. But as I say, I will share with you what we've done so far. So a bit of a potted history. So we started Learning from Excellence in Plymouth in 2016, and we gather our nominations electronically. And we have now got about 13,500 nominations, and about 1 in 5 of those come from patients. About 3 years ago, we decided that we wanted to try and improve our organizational learning from these Learning from Excellence reports. We decided to do a thematic analysis. So we looked at about 3,000 of these. Essentially what we showed was that the majority of nominations don't tend to be about processes or technical ability or the fact that an epidural was done well or an operation was successful. Actually, most of the time, the nominations refer to behaviours, and which is great to know. But what that does mean is it means that when we're trying to elicit the learning about it, it does make it slightly more complex. Because what we then have to do, if people appreciate behaviours, our learning going forward has to be about creating the conditions and supporting and reinforcing these positive behaviours. And this makes the actioning of that learning quite slow, quite messy, but then again, of potential huge benefit, because healthcare is such a people-delivered service. So we had to have quite a long think about how can we grow positive behaviours other than just telling people to behave, be nice. And this is really where Appreciative Inquiry has really helped us. So we use Appreciative Inquiry in sort of a couple of ways. So the first is that many of you may have heard Adrian speak about the concept of an iris. So an iris is, for those of you that don't know, is Siri spelt backwards. And IRIS stands for, it used to stand for improving resilience and inspiring success. But as we are trying to move away from the word resilience, we've actually changed that to improving reflection and inspiring success. And what we do is we hold an iris in a number of different scenarios. So the first may be if we receive a lot of nominations about one particular clinical event. So we've had things like a major obstetric hemorrhage, where we might get 5 or 6 nominations from a number of the multidisciplinary team. And we may say, all right, okay, well, a lot of people have felt that something good happened that day. So we'll try and get everyone to get together and talk about that and use Appreciative Inquiry to maximize our learning. There may also be the occasional individual nomination that looks rich in learning opportunity. And then also we've had a couple of months. So we had a leadership month, an ACE leadership month, which is Appreciation, Civility, Compassion and Excellence month, where we were doing a number of events to try and reinforce positive behaviours within leadership. So within that month, we decided that if there were some good learning from excellence nominations on leadership, that we would go and meet those people, the nominator and the nominee, and hold either a paired conversation or individual conversations with those people to try and really understand the circumstances and the behaviours and the actions that these people took to create, this good, not necessarily outcome, but this good feeling. So lots of structures that we use. Obviously, what we tend to use when we're going in for these meetings is I tend to broadly jot down some questions on the 5D structure. I find that's the one that I've used the most, and I'm sure Suzanne can elaborate on the 5D to explain if you've not come across that before. So an example of one that we had where we did a big iris was an emergency pediatric operation that unexpectedly became very complex and challenging. And we are not a tertiary pediatric centre, and basically we ended up in a situation where most of the staff, I think, felt out of their depth. But we were in the operation, and so there was no going back. So we had multiple LFE nominations for this case. So we got the whole MDT together afterwards to talk about the circumstance and behaviours that made this really unusual case really satisfying in a number of ways for the staff. I think it's important to point out that, again, learning from excellence, I'm sure many of you are aware that there is possibly a bit of a misnomer in the term learning from excellence, because a lot of people think that if it's learning from excellence, it's got to be an excellent outcome, but it's not limited to excellent outcomes. Sometimes we can have outcomes that are not ideal, but there was still excellence in process or behaviours that happened along the way. So this child was fine, but they had to be transferred to a regional ICU, and they were unwell for a long time. But as I say, even despite all those stressors, a number of people noticed that something brilliant, or a number of things brilliant, had happened that day. And so we managed to get consultant surgeons, the anaesthetist, the theatre team, and actually we invited the ICU staff that looked after the child whilst we were waiting for the child to be retrieved to go to the regional centre. And what the conversation focused on was about the behaviours that happened that day, and also how we could ensure something, if we were in a similar situation, how we could ensure that we got similar or even better outcomes in future. So when we did this, I'd only recently had my Appreciative Inquiry training, and I was quite nervous, I've got to admit. I thought people were going to be sceptical. I thought people would just sit and look at me and think I was just trying to, roll everything in glitter, when actually, there were some issues that day. And there were problems that needed to be addressed. And so they just say, well, why aren't you addressing the issues? Maybe this child shouldn't have come to theatre in the first place. But so deeply ingrained is the suspicion and the focus on what is not going well. I was nervous about how it was going to go. So I did prepare the questions in advance. But when we actually started, I was more than pleasantly surprised, because I really found that when you are asking questions and praising people and recognizing some of the actions that people may have considered to be small actions at the time, or not really worthy of any recognition or thanks, but when people recognized that they were being recognized for that, the conversation just transformed to become engaging, lively, expansive, generative. And whilst we learned a lot about what had happened that day, the conversation also moved on to wider appreciative topics. So things, like the value of the coffee room. But it wasn't sort of the value of the coffee room, oh, we haven't got a coffee room, we need more coffee rooms. It was offered in a generous and excitable way. And I'm not going to say that the whole thing was smooth. There was inevitably sort of the negative turns, and people would want to express their concerns or the negative emotions or their concerns about the day. But actually it was easier than I thought to gently steer people back and remind people that that as an IRIS, we were trying to improve the reflection and inspire success. And at the end of the session, I felt, it'd gone pretty well. But what was really interesting was the fact that after the event, we got lots of people emailing us who've been involved, just offering us some spontaneous feedback. I think Suzanne probably has that, and we can share that on the slide in a minute. Talking about how, that 45-minute conversation was the most useful thing they'd ever done in their NHS career. And how, we should be doing more of these. So from there, we've continued to do those. I suppose the inevitable question is, so, okay, what did we take away from that, IRIS? What was changed? Well, so much of it was about behaviours. So I think a lot of the learning that happened actually happened in the room, because we were talking and reinforcing the importance of compassion, compassionate leadership, psychological safety, and those things. So actually there was definitely reinforcement of positive behaviour. When it came to actions, there were a couple of processes, as in, you know, we got some sets up to the paediatric theatres that weren't there before. But generally, it has just it's been about behaviours and reinforcing that, and also they recognise themselves the importance of getting together and having a positive debrief, and how that can build appreciation and relationships within the team. So that's one way we've used appreciative inquiry. The other way that we've used appreciative inquiry has related primarily to our quality improvements. So I supervise a lot of medical students doing special study units. And we've done a range of projects looking at sort of improving handover in maternity and also growing civility and psychological safety. And we have made an absolute focus on using an appreciative approach. So in our baseline questionnaires or in our baseline measurements, it will be, you know, talking about a situation that has gone well. So as Suzanne alluded to, we wouldn't say, you know, when presenting our initial results, 60% of people or 40% of people have experienced incivility in the last month. We'd say 60% of people have experienced civil behaviour from their colleagues at work in the last month. And our aim is for 100% of our colleagues to be that by the end of the project. So it's small changes, but it is encouraging that positive growth mindset that is looking for opportunity. And particularly, you know, when you're looking at things like civility and psychological safety, actually taking that positive mindset sort of reinforces the whole message. So I think that that approach has been invaluable for our quality improvement projects. So I don't know whether you want me to stop there. I don't know if there's any questions or thoughts at this point, or what you would like me to do now, Suzanne. Do you want me to?
Thank you, Gemma, for giving us that practical application. If there are thoughts or questions, do put them in the chat. And once I stop slides, I could have a look at some of your lovely comments and questions in the chat. Thank you for those. And I'm going to look at the Ds in a minute. So we've got, there's quite a lot of questions coming in, isn't there? I'm thinking we might not be able to answer them now, but we can also send you some further resources. I noticed that Jonathan put a link to Belinda Dua's work, and My Home Life is also a great resource for appreciative inquiry materials. My Home Life Scotland. Perhaps you could put a link in for them. What I'd like to do is, I've got one of Gemma's reports, and so I thought I'll go and I'll just do a few more slides, which includes the Ds and SAW, and then we'll regroup again. Okay, so let me do, oops, share screen. Now, let me just get my slideshow. Start again. There we go. Right. So this is a patient experience, an LFE report, which I've titled On Patient Experience, but it's from a patient. And honestly, I think in some ways, Gemma, we could just read this. I mean, it's so lovely to hear this bit of feedback, but from a woman and also her partner, how this doctor helped them on the day of their birth. So perhaps I'll just let you all, I don't know, you might not all be able to see the screen, might you? I'll just read a few sentences. He could see from the outset that although this was a planned C-section, I was absolutely terrified. He had the perfect balance of lightening the mood to being 100% professional and kept me informed in detail throughout the procedure. So in terms of deciding to do an inquiry into this report, what we would be doing is we'd be looking for what's a good thing to question here, to ask more about. So it might be asking this doctor, how did you manage to combine being 100% professional and lightening the mood and keeping your patient informed? You know, that is a lot to do in one moment. What is it that helped you do that? And how could we bring that more into our training, for example, that people know how important those qualities are? So you find something in the report that you want to ask an appreciative question about. And then there's another element in here where the third paragraph, although he could see I was clearly upset, he softly spoke to me about getting some help and support following the birth in case I found it played on my mind afterwards. He got a tissue and wiped away the tears rolling down my face, which is, I mean, it's such a beautiful description, isn't it? So I think for that, I might ask, you know, how does someone manage their own emotions and the emotions of the patient or the family members and still be practical and display compassion? I mean, that's also a lot to do in one moment. So I think we're asking here, how do people bring all these amazing qualities into their work, and how could more of that be done? And I've got my thing. I was just going to read the last paragraph. Yeah, he literally got me and my partner through what was the most memorable day of our lives. But even when things were a little touch and go, he remained calm and worked above and beyond words. And apologies for this taking 6 weeks to write, but it's taken me that long to absorb what happened. But this man truly deserves a medal. So I don't know if any of you got the chance to go to the Learning from Excellence conference, the fourth one, which was held the last October online, which was, I think, a genuine tour de force. But that included a presentation from a researcher and writer who had done a whole article on the power of compliments. So he was validating that compliments represent a great resource for us of feedback on what we've done, but also what we might want to do more of and how we can talk about those things. Because often, you know, your general QI measures might not pick up some of the things in this report, but they're clearly so important. So we'll have another report we're going to look through after a few more slides. Let me just see, can I get going on this? There we go. So I wanted to just include for you a quote which came from the 2019 Patient Safety Strategy. And I was so delighted when I found this in the strategy. It really validates that they know about the value of appreciation and adaptation and practice. And the second paragraph that I took from that report, conversations are important. Appreciative inquiry and learning from excellence creates a more positive culture and provide meaningful positive feedback. Ask people who complete certain tasks every day how they get them done. So appreciative inquiry is as simple as that. You know, ask people who complete certain tasks every day how they get them done. So for those of you who might want to feel more support in using appreciative inquiry or LFE, it's great to know that it's actually named in the safety strategy. And this also brings me to psychological safety, which is a really significant element in this whole mix and in our cultures generally. And from a very sort of often quoted piece of research that Google did on high performing teams, actually was the focus of that research. And they talked to thousands of people and they found these two behaviors are critical. So the equality in conversational turn taking, how can we give everyone a voice? And that's what keeps the collective intelligence of our team functioning. And it also builds the psychological safety. And then high social sensitivity, how can we pick up on how others are feeling, paying attention to non-verbal cues? And those two behaviors produce psychological safety. And all my experience says that having an appreciative inquiry approach helps those two things happen. It brings in emotional intelligence because it allows emotions to be part of a conversation. So it's safe to learn, it's safe to contribute, it's safe to challenge, everyone feels included. There's a definition of psychological safety from Amy Edmondson on that slide. And there's a lot on this slide, but I put some of these slides in because I'll go out to you afterwards. But these 4 elements of psychological safety: learner safety, collaborator safety, inclusion safety, and challenger safety. So all of those topics could be become the subject of an appreciative conversation very easily. You know, so take collaborator safety, there's a line in there, maintaining open dialogue. So an appreciative conversation could just begin, tell me about an open dialogue that you had recently or that you were an observer of, or even that you read. What was it that made that happen? What were the factors that helped it to remain open? So you just choose what you want to know more about and you put your questions behind it and around it. We'll keep doing a couple more examples. So here's some questions. Again, this is a lot for the presentation now, but when you get the slides, you'll see it's some examples of things that can support psychological safety with your team members. They're sample questions. You can take any of these questions and adapt it to fit yourself, your own personality and your team, and then ask them, just drop them into team meetings or conversations. Here's a nice one at the beginning though. What's the thing you see me doing that's helping me best contribute to the team? One thing we have to get over in appreciative inquiry is the way in which we've been trained to think we shouldn't talk about ourselves and our good qualities at all. And so we have to start to educate. We have to feel authentically comfortable with asking people about what's good so that then they can also authentically respond. So that's why I'm also encouraging people to take it small, to make sure that you're staying authentic to your own system as you expand your comfort with it. So here's the 5D cycle that Gemma mentioned. So the top one is the definition, and in the definition phase you're given your topic, and then you move into discovery, appreciating and learning about the best of what is, and then into dream, imagining the best of what could be. So imagine our team is feeling really buoyant and resilient. What's happening? How did we increase our level of resilience? Could be a question around the dream phase. And then the design, determining what should be. Then we start to say, so how can we do more of that? Design is small. They're small steps. What can we do where we build our resilience more? Would having weekly team meetings where we focus on resilient moments, would that do it? That's design is as simple as that. And then destiny or delivery is, how do we make that whole system sustainable? How do we make that our culture? How do we make it the soil of our being, of our workplace? And I'm going to talk a little bit more about a soil metaphor later, I hope. And then the other tool is a SOAR tool. So we've replaced a SWOT, we've taken out the weaknesses and the threats, and we've put in opportunities, which was already in there, sorry. We've put in aspirations, what is the future we're moving towards, and results, what are the results we want to see to show us that we've got there, and what are the resources that we need to get there. So there's the versions that you put in and the topic that you go for. Here's a few more illustrations. Again, there's a lot on this slide, but it's just a good way of you, when we send you the slides afterwards, you can draw on these questions if you want to do a SOAR. This comes also from Jackie Stavros's work, who really sort of pioneered the use of SOAR. This is a lovely example. It came from someone who's on a training course with me at the moment, and she's a beautiful artist. So this was her outline for a meeting she did around reviewing involvement processes. So she set up her section, she set up her questions in the four corners. Again, that'll be one that you'll be able to see better when you can get it full screen. But there's lovely questions in there. And it just reminds us that we have to put the topic at the center of what we're talking about. And she also did this really beautiful one, which is a personal development store. So again, I just wanted to share these with you because they're so great to use. Okay, so Gemma, I've got another LFE report here. How do I manage this? Have a conversation with you about it and keep screen sharing so people can see it. What should we do?
Well, if you leave the slide up.
Okay.
Then
you talk to this.
Okay, so here is an LFE report that we've had from Plymouth in the last week. And so the top box is what did they do that was excellent? And the second box is what went well as a result. And the last box is what can we change or learn from this? So I'll give you a moment to read it. But then what we thought might be quite nice is for people to actually practice. So then imagine that you're going to go and have a conversation with C in an appreciative inquiry fashion to try and maximize the learning that you can take away from this Learning from Excellence report. So I think with over 100 participants, the only way we're going to manage to do this is through the chat. But it's a real opportunity to have a load of appreciative questions coming in, and it'd be nice to see what people would go and ask C.
Great, Gemma. Should we give a little bit of time for that?
Yeah, or just when you're ready, start throwing it out there in the chat. Hopefully we'll then have a little bank of appreciative questions as well that everyone can take away with them. So please repeat the questions that inform each. So the top box is what did they do that was excellent? The second is what went well as a result. That's probably the. So what did they do and what was the result of that?
And we can also send that out as one of the resources. It was hard to get it all on the slide so people could see it. But yeah, thank you, Gemma.
So Patrick's come in and said, what did you do to proactively educate the team? So that's a nice appreciative question, isn't it?
Yeah.
Expanding on that, you know, what did you do to proactively educate the team? You know, how did you do it? Where did you do it? How could you ensure that that happened again in the future? How could you share it?
Nice.
What would your team say you do well to motivate them? Lovely question. And you could also say, well, what do you feel you do well to motivate your own team? Because you clearly have from this LFE. Because people may be dismissive of that, but there's evidence in front of them to say that you do that. You clearly do that. So you must be doing something. And often they'll go, I find, initially they'll go, oh, it's nothing. Or say, well, it's not nothing. Someone's really noticed this and really appreciated it. So you must be doing something. And it takes people a little while to warm up and go, well, okay, well, I suppose what I do is this or that.
That's a lovely question from Patrick. How do you make sure that nothing is too much trouble when you are so busy? Yeah. And you can see, can't you, how these can just be dropped into conversation. You don't need a formal AI moment. Beautiful, Diane, that's a lovely one. And the other thing you'll notice as you're asking these questions, that depending on the setting and the context, it might help where you first of all make an affirmative statement. So I notice that you really do pay attention to caring for your team. And I'm wondering what helps you prioritize that. So sometimes you might benefit from having that preface in there as well. Good. Okay.
And then there's something I think I can see on the design one, because it says, as a result, I have on both occasions been able to return to work that I've enjoyed over the years. Well, you know, a design and a dream, you know, how can we ensure that other managers, you know, can support, or what can we do as a whole organization to ensure that people feel supported when they return to work in the way that you've supported Caroline? You must have done something specific. And obviously, if you have the conversation with Caroline as well, you can elicit more from that as well. So if you can have both of those conversations, either individually or even together, and you can see how that's how you can really maximize the learning from excellence reports. Because we could go through and say, well, okay, being supportive is really important. But if you want to get the nitty gritty learning with what are we going to take forward from this, you have to have these conversations. It's very hard, I think, to do it on, you know, an LFE report, which is normally at most half a page long. Yeah, that's a nice one. The person still felt part of the team. How did you go about prioritizing this as an outcome? That's a lovely one. I really like that. Yeah, what does supportive? So how did you feel supportive? What does supportive mean? Jonathan has said that, you know, and it's true. What does that look like? What did supportive look like day to day? You know, what did she actually do?
So, you know what you could do? So in the AI world, we could take being supportive as an inquiry topic. So that would be the D, the definition. And then we could look, let's just go and ask questions across the team about, tell me a moment when you supported someone, or you saw someone being supported, or you were supported. Because you can always go into the topic from many perspectives. So then you'd ask for the story first, because it's really important to get stories in the mix in Appreciative Inquiry. They help us relate to each other from a slightly different perspective, and usually everyone has a story, and it stops us going straight into that analytical linear brain. So we start with a story question, and then you could say, so what were the strengths that enable that supportive moment to happen? What do you value about supporting others or being supported? So you're going through those questions, that 5 points of the star, that positive core. And then you could say, imagine in our team, we're feeling really supported despite the pressures that we are under, both nationally and regionally and domestically. It doesn't matter how you want to word it. So we're feeling supported. Who's contributing to that feeling of support? How did we get there? What challenges did we overcome to be feeling more supported? And then the design. So what one small thing could we do that would promote I wouldn't use the word promote. One small thing could we do to make sure that everyone in the team feels supported? And we would be looking for tiny things. So once you've decided your topic, you'll do a mini AI on it, and then you'll start thinking that will give you a lot of data and information as what supportive means to people and how you can support it in small ways.
Radhika's come up with a nice question. Which behaviours or actions, meant the most to you and had the greatest positive impact?
Oh, that's a very nice question, isn't it? Because that's a very open one. And that would then give you some more inquiry topics that you could seed from that. And you're allowing people to start with almost a clean slate. That's lovely, Radhika.
And another, I quite like the question, because it does help give you a couple of actions. Is say, right, okay, now we've had this conversation, what are you going to take away that you can do tomorrow to make a difference? What are you going to do differently tomorrow? And what can we aim for that's going to be different in 6 months? And what can we aim that's going to be different or better in a year? And I said, well, tomorrow I think I'm going to spend more time with my staff. Over the next 6 months, I'm going to build in, more time into the daily timetable or the weekly timetable to get everybody together to talk about and include people who, have been, invite people who are potentially off sick but still want to keep in touch with us. So you actually then get some actions which can be helpful.
Thank you, Gemma. That's really lovely to illustrate it in that way, about near future and further off future. And I'm just seeing Deanna's question asking about feelings to support reflection. And yes, I always have a question in an appreciative conversation, about a story or a moment, and how did you feel? Or how did it feel? So it's a significant part of AI, and I think it's what helps bring the emotions and the emotional intelligence into the mix. And obviously some people, like I happen to like emotions a lot, and I go in and out of them. They're not, for some people it might not feel as comfortable, and that's a journey in itself, really. I've been doing a lot of inner work for 30 years or more, so I've got to the point where I know emotions come and go, and it's okay, but that might take a little bit of getting used to for some people, so we have to kind of judge. But I can say that in all of my time running these kind of appreciative inquiry sessions, and I've experienced people coming up with a lot of feelings, and there's not been a time, where it hasn't meant something to someone to access those feelings. Yes. And then you've got your question on impact, Deanna. How can we ensure that feedback such as this impacts on future practice? That's quite a deep question, isn't it? Because there's a lot happening in there. I would make that a simpler question. How can we do more of this? And then you might want to, because then that would give you the different ways that doing more might happen, rather than predefining them into future practice. And then hopefully you'd be able to pick things out of the range of answers which would give you future practice. Oh yes, and Diana, you've shared that lovely thing from Belinda Dewar, her stories have legs. Yes. What stands out for you? What are you wondering about? And then having been part of this session, what would you like it to be in the future? It's great to add in here, Diana. Thank you.
When you say that question of how can we do more of this, I reckon there'll be lots of things that will come from this LFE report and the conversation, but then also what C might do, say, well, actually, it's interesting because this organization is focusing on what I do well. So, and also I felt the benefit of getting a Learning from Excellence nomination. So C, if you've had an appreciative conversation, will probably be one of your main ambassadors now for Learning from Excellence, and will help, seed and spread the Learning from Excellence. But also I think it sends quite a powerful message to C to say, look, someone's actually noticed, and not only have they sent me a card, but this organization now is taking note of positive behavior. So it's not just about trying to get out of the red boxes on the spreadsheets. This is about growing excellence. This is about trying to be the best that we can be. This is about developing quality, not just, hoping we don't have any never events. So I think that is a real start, a real ripple to sort of cultural change, having these conversations. They are the little seeds everywhere that will just start sprouting. So there's actions that will come out of it, but I think there's so much that happens in that moment from that conversation and from paying attention to it.
Thank you. Yes, I've just noticed David Vera's name on the call. That's lovely to see you here, David. You've been a big part of a lot of the stuff in Plymouth. Lynn asked a question, have we any historical data yet that shows how much improvement has been made from using AI rather than traditional methods? You know, AI has been going since the middle of the 80s, and there are a lot of books now on it. Many of them are on the whole a bit academic, but there are also quite a lot that are practical. It's David Cooper-Ryder, who initiated AI in the beginning. He's still using it all over the world. I know somebody who's using it in her work, supporting people through climate change anxiety. So there's a massive spread. It's being used in a business school to support business that's good for the planet. So if you sort of Google Appreciative Inquiry, you'll get quite a lot of, and you put in the topic you're interested in, you'll get up a lot of books and articles sharing some of the data and the experience with it. So I would say yes. In fact, the Green Mountain Coffee, which is one of the companies that used Appreciative Inquiry in the 90s, early 2000s, a very successful coffee company, they were so delighted with how it supported their company that they then donated $10 million to set up the Cooper-Ryder Center for Appreciative Inquiry in Champlain University. So that's, I suppose, it could be a story with legs. Just seeing that comment there as well. And then a question from Kiara. It's around where AI is used to deal with people who have had difficult, less than optimal experiences with other services. I did a really significant piece of work in terms of time and content with people in the homeless world. So I trained staff in homeless hostels and homeless services. And then I also ran events where homeless people were invited to join them. And one of the things that set me off on that path was doing, at the time I was working in a housing association, and I did some research into good practice in hostels. And they talked about the revolving door experience, where people would come in off the streets, go into a hostel, but then they'd go out that revolving door again. Something would just trigger them and they'd go back on the streets where they felt comfortable. And one of the things I noticed listening to some conversations with homeless people was the bulk of their conversational with professionals was about their problems. How did they get to be like this? What happened? So they were going over and over that old ground regularly, and it just wasn't helping them. So that gave me the question, so what would it be like if we talked to people about their strengths on the streets? So that took a journey, because it wasn't going to be easily answered initially. So the first question I asked them was, tell me about a time when you helped a friend. So everybody has done that. And then once we got the examples from the people, how they'd helped a friend on the street or in the hostel, then we could look at that story and say, so look, I see these strengths in that story you've just told. You know, do you feel that you recognize those strengths? And gradually getting them to, so you have to, sometimes you have to put in like an intermediate step in order to get into this new paradigm. And also you need to recognize that not everyone will want to do it. So whenever I ran these events, there was always somebody, at least one, who would leave very early on, perhaps sometimes in a little bit of a temper, but the main thing was it wasn't right for them. So it has to be very permissive, that people are there on a voluntary basis. But there are some great organizations now doing work with the homeless. Mayday Trust had set its whole process up as being strengths-based. But you were perhaps thinking more about patients, and there is stuff with patients, but I can't bring examples to mind right now. Okay, anybody else? Shall we?
I was going to say just briefly as well, you can use, these appreciative inquiry techniques even in things like series, even though it is a serious incident. It doesn't mean that everything in there was, often a series relates to an outcome, but it doesn't mean that everything in the process was bad. There will still be nuggets of learning and positivity throughout that, no matter what the outcome was. So, and it's very easy just to focus retrospectively with all the bias negativity bath on trying to pin down one thing. But I often think that if we just do that, our learning is so limited, because what comes out of those is another checklist or another process. And we don't really learn. I don't think a lot of stuff changes dramatically anymore. But actually, if you start asking, okay, there is that element that we could change and improve, but what did go well in this? What other behaviors were they? Do people appreciate I really think it's about practicing those mindset and having those small conversations, and it might just be that was 2 minutes of a 20-minute meeting just to try and get up, but it's the ripple, isn't it, that gets people thinking, oh, okay, trying to think a bit differently. And it is, I love the way that Suzanne described to me in the beginning, that it's like a muscle. So because we're our negativity muscle and our obsession with focusing on what's wrong, we've got a really strong negative muscle, and when you try and do something positive, it feels very weak. But the more you practice it, the easier it gets, and the more natural it gets, and the better you get at it. So taking every opportunity to practice. I like practicing on my children. So
yes, that's a good way to practice. And if you look on the Conversations Worth Having website, you can download a PDF about questions to ask your children, which give you a little different hint for questions. And then and David, just your question about learning from excellence approach. I think to go on their website is a really good start. To follow stuff on Twitter, because you see lots of people doing. You don't need really training to do learning from excellence per se. It's a positive reporting system. But what people then tend to do is do appreciative inquiry training, so that supports how they do learning from excellence. And one of the books, we've got quite a lot of resources available on our website, some free downloads and some to buy. But Reflections, we put in there a story from Adrian Plunkett's called A Tale of Two Series, which gives a really nice summary of what motivated him, I think, to set this up. So you could have a look, and that's also a blog, I think, on the Learning from Excellence site, The Tale of Two Series. I was going to say something else then. I'm just looking at the time. I've got a few more slides that sort of summarize things and review, but is there anything else people would like to ask or raise before we do that?
Let me just point out here that if we don't have time for all the questions, I'm going to have a look at the chat and bring the last few questions to the SIG space. So please join Learn from Excellence SIG, and we might get to the questions later.
Yes. Oh yes, just let me answer Radhika's question. So how can you start the conversation when discussing a SIRI or never event positively without looking as though you're avoiding the issue? So we have some friends in the appreciative inquiry world in UK who their whole professional life, they were directors ultimately of family services, social care. And then they became appreciative inquiry practitioners, and they still work a lot in that field. So they have done a beautiful model for how to do almost an inquiry. They call it collaborative inquiry, but they're taking cases where there has been some serious harm or some negligence, something like the baby P case. And they framed a process where you don't negate the harm that's been caused, but you do come into the whole meeting together with an emphasis on learning and an emphasis on valuing everybody's contribution and wanting to understand what went wrong and what can we do differently next time. And actually, if I think about one of the stories that Dan Hodgkiss told me from his work in patient safety in Walsall, that most patients who initiated a complaint, they wanted to be heard and they wanted to make sure it didn't happen to someone else. They didn't want to exact vengeance. And so the kind of framework that an appreciative inquiry approach can offer allows that learning to happen, and it allows people to be heard. I'll get a link in for the collaborative inquiry book about that one. I'll put it in. Okay. Oh, Thank you, Matthew. Oh, you've put something in there as well. That's great. Okay, so shall I finish the last few slides? What do you think? Yeah? Anything? Okay. Gemma, do you want to add anything? Or feel free to chip in while I'm doing the last slides.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. Right, so we did that one. So that's just reminders. Oh, I just put this in actually to remind you that 15 seconds, 30 minutes is another great sort of slightly parallel movement in the NHS, which I see lots of overlaps with. These are some concluding things. So I see appreciative inquiry as a problem dissolving approach, which is a really nice way of looking at the different paradigm. This quote came from someone called David Shakid, who has done a great book on combining appreciative inquiry and lean methods. Yeah, so we're looking, it's something to create spaciousness. Our work life is so busy and intense that anything that can give us a feeling of, yes, that's what, you know, what, how can we do that? And sometimes it's me taking the time to ask an appreciative question, or sometimes it's offering someone else that space by asking them something in a way they might not have been expecting. You'll know you've done something good when someone says to you, oh, I don't know about that, let me think. That'll mean you've asked a really good question. So, and we're looking at something that supports our emotional intelligence and well-being. So these are the assumptions that sit underneath appreciative inquiry. In every situation, something works. Find it and let it flourish. What we focus on becomes our reality. If we focus on possibilities, we find possibilities. Or if we focus on problems, we find them too. The way we ask questions either creates or denies possibilities. So just look out for that. Is there anything in what you say which is to do that? And can you make it a more expansive? This is where generative questions come in. Generative questions create and expand sense of possibility and ownership and authorship. And it's like great coaching. There's a big overlap between appreciative inquiry and coaching, and there's books specifically on the combination of the two. The language we use creates our reality. Here's another one. When you look for the good in others, you discover the good within yourself. So it's really important that both things happen. It's not just one way. This I found recently, actually, it was Lindsay Godwin who shared this. She's the professor at the Cooper-Ides Centre in Vermont. But it came from somebody, Eli Wiesel, who was actually an inmate in a concentration camp. And so in that word question, there's a beautiful part, quest. We're all partners in a quest. The essential questions have no answers. You are my question and I am yours. And then there is dialogue. The moment we have answers, there's no dialogue. Questions unite people. So that's perhaps a little on the further fringes of appreciative inquiry, but it expresses one of the intentions I have. It's dialogue. Are we really facilitating dialogue? Not a sort of table tennis version of a conversation. And all of that leads to who are we becoming? Who will we be? The most exciting breakthroughs of the 21st century will not occur because of technology, but because of an expanding concept of what it means to be human. Whatever you can do or dream you can, begin it, start your LFE or whatever it is you want to do. So access the power. These are my suggestions if you want any to get going, but access the power of intention. Before you go into a meeting, say to yourself, I'd like this to be a bit different to a usual meeting, or I'd like it to sow the seeds of cooperation, or I'd like it to be something which means we can all see more about each other's strengths. Think about your intention. And then when you come out of the meeting, just notice, how did that intention then show up? Set the scene. So you might need to give people a bit of a pre-warning that this is a slightly different approach, a slightly different conversation. A lot of people like to get some warning in their system that it's going to be different. So find your way of saying, and don't say this might seem odd, because that's a sort of counterproductive, but you can say this might be a different kind of conversation than we normally have. Just bear with me if it feels a little strange. So try out generative questions, which obviously you did so well at the beginning of this call. Develop your appreciative mindset. Experiment with imagined questions. See how you can drop them in. And there's a couple more links to Learning from Excellence, and they've got loads of podcasts on the Learning from Excellence site.